Bienvenidos a Vecinos, Neighbors, un programa que ofrece nuevos puntos de vista de los vecinos de Holyoke y de la comunidad latina del Pioneer Valley. Hello again. I'm Magdalena Gomez, welcoming you to the weekly presentation of Vecinos, Neighbors, a program that brings new points of view from our neighbors in Holyoke and the Latino community in the Pioneer Valley. Today we're bringing you the keynote remarks of Alex Rodríguez, the Commissioner of Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. His words marked the beginning of the symposium, Latino Males at Risk, Addressing the Future, that was organized by the Gándara Centro of Springfield. Alex Rodríguez draws from his own experiences growing up Puerto Riqueño in the United States and discusses the roots of cultural ambivalence and the challenges that face young Latino males today. And now, here's Alex Rodríguez.
Good morning. What I want to do this morning as keynote speaker for this conference on Hispanic male at risk is to talk about what's wrong and how to make it right. What's wrong in a global manner and how to make it right in a global manner. I don't want to steal the thunder from the workshops, one of which I will be moderating, and I don't profess in any manner to have the hindsight in history or the presence in history to know what happened at every intersection. But I think we can see how fragile human life is by simply reading our newspapers today and looking at what's happened in northern Iraq to a Kurdish population. Life is very fragile. Certain unpredictable phenomena will occur, some caused by humankind and others caused by nature. This is not new to us. The oldest written record we depend on that talks about how humankind dealt with each other is the biblical record. We challenge that record often, especially the most educated non-believers. Well, then who was Abel's father, etc. And cynical displays of our intelligence challenging a historical record that tells us about ourselves. The Garden of Eden story tells us about ourselves. It says that through oral history, somebody told somebody that once things were okay. And what did okay mean? Okay meant you lived near the water. The temperature was pretty consistent throughout the year. You had the hills behind you so the animals wouldn't attack. You had a sunny cave. The family stayed together in the cave. The food was there to pick, and things were okay. And what did okay mean? Okay meant you lived near the water. The temperature was pretty consistent throughout the year. You had the hills behind you so the animals wouldn't attack. You had a sunny cave. The family stayed together in the cave. The food was there to pick, and things were okay. And life was about interrelating with each other, caring for each other, very simple, very uncomplicated, as it can be today. Except we don't want it that way. I can stop right there. That's the bottom line. We don't want it that way. We as a people don't want it that way. The Kurdish people were living relatively comfortably with oppression, but relatively comfortably a year ago. And then the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse fell upon them. You know what that is. War, followed by famine, followed by hunger, followed by death. And we see it today. Just like that, it happens. Life is very fragile. The commitment to well-being is the solution to the fragileness of life. How to formulate that commitment around a particular people's concern is the question that has to be asked and answered. That's what we're here for today. Let's look at our history as a people. Not the whole Hispanic people. It's too much. It's too differential. Let's talk about Puerto Ricans for a minute. We come from strains of very dignified people. They're my strains. We come from Spanish folk who had just put together a nation at a very important time in history. Note that the Ottoman Empire was formed in 1492 and got strong. China starts coming together. What's happening? Well, you got a couple of 100 years of agricultural genius happening. People have more food, they're living longer, and they need more space and resources. And they pull it together. The historians in the audience know what I'm talking about. And Queen Isabella and Ferdinand pull it together. They do some good things, they do some more bad things. Next year we celebrate 500 years of the coming. The first real coming. Us, we've been here 500 years. That's a long time. But that same queen causes the Jewish people of the world to celebrate 500 years of going next year, of the Exodus, of being pushed out, our cousins, the Sephardim, our brothers and sisters, being pushed out. That same culture. At the same time, about 1,000 miles south, on the west coast of Africa, there were some magnificent princes and princesses living in little villages who were doing very well as populations grew. And at the same time here, where people were to come, we must remember there were our other relatives. The natives of the island, living their lives after years of struggling, positioning themselves for different reasons, finding highland and lowland, dignified people who had figured it out. But the world is fragile. It doesn't stay the same. And that queen, like most intelligent people at that time, didn't believe the world was flat. Again, that's Anglo history. She didn't believe the world was flat. Folk had already seen the shadow on the moon. They had already figured it out. It was, whether you talked about it or not publicly, it was the prevailing learning. Folk knew the world wasn't flat. The only issue was there anything between Spain and India? Did we know? That was the only real issue. I mean, that if there weren't, Columbus wasn't going to make it, folk. That was a small boat. That's what the concern was. Some people say that's why she chose an Italian and not a Spaniard. But the bottom line is the coming happened, and we come from those roots. Now, I can pick up my roots at about 1720, coming to PR on my father's side. I can't pick up my mother's roots until the 1800s because she comes from a slave background in the early 1800s. And I can't pick up my native roots, but I can pick up my Spanish roots at about 1720. And I know about the coming, and I know about the family Bible and how people moved around from Guayama to Vega Alta into San Juan. I know how my family moved around on one side. I don't know about the other side. I still have some research to do. But I know that there were challenges and there were difficulties, but it was evolving in a rather interesting way. My grandmother, Dolores Hernandez, was a Spaniard. She was born in 1882. When General Mills hit the shore in 98, she was a woman, a Spanish woman. She was not a Puerto Rican. She died a Spaniard, like the Tories in the United States. She died a Spaniard. She never understood this thing, Puerto Rican. She was a real racist. Blanquita de España. You know? She was a real racist. She didn't want to know about this Puerto Rican stuff. Her family came from a different line, and they wanted to be Spanish. ¿Qué pasa aquí? You know, General Mills comes in, and all of a sudden we're Puerto Rican. ¿Qué es eso? You know? She wanted to be Spanish. ¿Qué pasó? ¿Quién es ese? ¿Quién son los feos americanos? Míralo. You know, the walking around, taking over the island, cutting the schools, taking the jobs. But that's what happened. And I heard the stories from my grandmother through her racism. Her racism caused her to be out of our lives for most of our lives, coming in only when she knew she was going to die. She came back. She cut my father off because he married my black mother. And you didn't do that. Tú sabes, más negro de yo, no mi casa, you know, hey. We've heard it, you know, the non-racist Puerto Ricans, you know. We know where we come from. We come from a mixed history, a different history. It was a nation coming together, and as it was growing, the possibility was discontinued by an illegitimate, unwanted interference by an outside presence who understood the concept of advantage. They understood what they were grabbing. They understood how strategic that little island was to the well-being of their families. It's about well-being. The question is, whose well-being? They understood that if you put a ship in the ocean, a sailboat, and you let it loose from the Mediterranean, and you have the dumbest sailors in the world, it's going to end up in the Caribbean. They knew that. And they knew that that was a threat to our well-being. So they took the island. They knew what they were doing. And we, remember, folk come to this nation three ways, two ways really. You want to come, or somebody forces you to come. That's the only two ways you get here. We break it down more sophisticated. In present day dialogue, we talk about in-migration and migration because you come from for political reasons, for economic reasons. Look, you either want to come or somebody forces you to come. Well, we were in an in-between zone. We were here, and we are annexed people. We have to understand that. And annexed people, by definition, don't sit at the table. So you want to know where the problem is? The problem is that we're not supposed to have well-being. That's the problem. But we can't understand that. And we still insist on having well-being, and they don't understand why we insist. It's very confusing to the power that we have to deal with every day. So we have to make sense of this. How do you begin making sense of it? Well, you look at what's wrong. What's wrong is, no matter how hard we give. That if we depend on another force to give us back, we're not going to get it. Understand that. If we work for the man, we will not get it. We have to work for ourselves. And we have to learn that lesson very quickly. And in order to work for ourselves, we have to have and develop within our communities structures that are almost impossible to develop. Because the man doesn't want us to have those structures. We can't develop those structures on the island, which we can't run. We can pretend to run it, but we can't run it. We don't own it. Do Puerto Ricans own Puerto Rico? Nope. We don't own it. We live on it, but we don't own it. We don't own the hotels. We don't own our subsidized housing. We don't own our post office. Somebody else owns it. We use it. We live there. We accommodate someone else. We're allowed to have a political structure, and we've been, since '52, as you know, allowed to have a political structure, and we pretend that that means something. Jaime Fuster goes to Washington and cuts deals for us. I love Jaime. He's a good friend of mine. Folk run around and do Spanish only. We fight English only here, but we welcome Spanish only there. We do Spanish only because, mira, if they're going to take it, then they're going to have to change the law, because they're not going to make me speak English, man. They're right. You know? You don't go to speak English, but we take on the big, real important issues. No, the real important issue is owning the island. That's our island. That's the real important issue, owning it. And we don't own it. And we got to figure out how to own the island.
You know, in my younger days, yeah, you know, I was for independence on the island. In my older days, I don't care. You know, if they give me the vote, and if it works out, if Sereno's works out and I get the vote, I'll vote for something. I don't know why. But in my younger days, I used to think glorified. But the only reason I was for independence on the island was because I always thought if I went back, hell, if it's a state, the most I could be is governor. If it's independent, I can be president. You know? And hey, why not? So I always thought that I'd rather be president of something than governor of something. And it seems to me, and I sat with Governor Colon and I said, don't you want to be president? And he said, well, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Yes, it's very difficult. And I understand that independence associates with radical left. Well, I don't believe that. You know, the wave of democracy in the world has shown that ain't going to play anywhere.
And I want to get a little personal and talk about giving and not getting back, as I said earlier. Because we tend to do that. Latinos tend to believe that if you give, you get back. You don't. Let me tell you about my own family. My mother was raised in Barrio Obrero. My father, I said, came down from Guayama to Vega Alta. They were landowners. They came down to San Juan. He met my mother and got disowned by his mother. And he met her in New York City after she had gone to Dallas, Texas to work as a maid because she had been shamed. A guy with a white horse came when she was 13 and picked her up and took her away to the mountains. And when she came back, she had a child at 14 years old, my brother Gilbert. This was in the early 1900s. And so her mother had to send her away, and sent her to Dallas with this family to work as a maid. The family would summer in Rochester, New York. Her sister then went to meet her husband, who was coming back from the First World War, my Uncle Trine, and my father was in the same company as my Uncle Trine. Yeah, Puerto Ricans fought in the First World War, my father did. And they went back to New York, and they all partied, and my mother went down and partied, and she stayed with them ever since. And they had a good time, 13 children's worth.
And 13 of us were born, 9 of us were raised to adulthood, and there are 8 of us left now. There were 5 men. My father was 6. Father served in the First World War. And then he was a merchant seaman for the rest of his life, so he was around sometimes and he wasn't around. My brother Gilbert served in the Second World War. He gave. My cousin, Georgie, and I'll get back to him, served in the Second World War. My only male cousin, my mother's sister's son, he gave. My 2 brothers served in Korea, the Forgotten War. Korea, some of you are too young. Read the books. And my brother Hector served in Vietnam, 2 tours of duties. One thing they all shared in common is they were all wounded in war. They were all wounded in war. They were all wounded in war. My father came back walking, but not life-threatening. My brother Gilbert had a developmental disability because of the war. He's in a wheelchair now. He's 65, 66 years old now. My mother's 85. My brother Carlito made 1 drop into Korea with the airborne, and 5 days later he was paralyzed from the waist down at 18 years old and still sits in a wheelchair. My brother Johnny was shot 6 times and was not able to get a lot of medical attention because he was some of McCarthy's folk, General MacArthur, who marched north beyond the Ho Chi Minh Peninsula. They were the Americans that weren't there, that had gone and violated the UN charter, and therefore we pretended, just like the Cambodian presence, we pretended they weren't there. As you know, Truman finally fired MacArthur over that issue. My brother was part of that. He spent 14 months in the same set of clothing and was wounded 6 times in that process. And the only medical attention he got was from a corpsman that gave him medical attention, again, not life-threatening, and then came back a very bitter man. He died of cancer 5 years ago. And my brother Hector, who was in Vietnam, 2 tours of duty, is one of the non-victims of the non-existing pesticide Agent Orange that does nothing to you if you breathe it. And he's dying from cancer right now here in Boston.
We gave to the United States of America. We gave, and not very much was given back, because it doesn't work that way. You gotta go out and get it.
My sisters were all able to lead the family in very sensitive times. My father, when I was 12 years old, was murdered. And so my sisters, one by one, dropped out of school to support the family. I'm happy to say that every one of the people I've mentioned, I was the first to go on to college. I was the first to graduate from college. But every one of my sisters and brothers, seeing this little schmuck being able to go to college, said, hey, if he can do it, we can do it. And every one of them have gone back, and almost every one of them have finished. And my oldest sister is 62 years old, and she's in her 3rd year in college. You know? And I think that my sister Irma understands that you gotta do it yourself. You've gotta do it yourself. I can talk about the socio-political factors, and I think I alluded to them. We don't control the island we come from. We are annexed people. We have to remember that the other 60% of the Latinos here in the United States were also annexed people. My wife's a Chicana. I didn't know much about those strange people who we are associated with, all Hispanics. We are the monolith Hispanics, okay? I didn't know a damn thing about Chicanos until I met my wife. I thought, like most of them, well, you're Mexican, aren't you? Well, yeah, from old Mexico. Well, I didn't know what that answer meant until I really thought about it. She was born in Colorado. Her grandfather was born in Colorado. Her great-grandfather was born in Colorado. Her great-great-grandfather was born in New Mexico. And then where did the family come from before that? Louisiana. And where did they come from before that? Spain. Did they ever live south of the Rio Grande River? Never. They lived in old Mexico, the Mexico we took, the Mexico that the French lived in for 1,000 years and sold to us, remember? Interesting thing, you can be in France and own the Louisiana territory and sell it to the United States. That's a real good idea. Anybody want to buy part of Jerusalem? It is those ridiculous realities of power that got us where we are. Annexed people aren't supposed to sit at the table. We are only 80 years citizens. Remember that. 83, somebody said, I don't know how many years, but around that time. About 80-something years citizens of this country. That's it. We're the new kids on the block. You know, and we're not selling records. We have to understand that our disadvantage was intended. That's the gist of the message. We were not supposed to have the cave in the sun. We were not supposed to be closer to the water. We were not supposed to be protected from the wild animals. We were supposed to do for somebody else.
And we've done fairly well doing for somebody else. We have half of us, a little less, who live there and serve the tourist industry very well, make the beds, you know, stand behind the counter and give out the golf clubs, rent the rent-a-cars, and do what a tourist industry is supposed to do. We are the other half of vacation land. We have the more toxic chemicals that we won't develop here, over there, so they can kill our folk first before we test them here. We know what we are. Understand that. There is no shame having been taken in war. We were. And we've done fairly well since then. We got to look at the positive side. There are other folk, like the Kurds, who have to fear being taken in war, who have to run to the hilliest places and suffer the disaster of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. We didn't have to do that. We were lucky. So there's some benefits to this. The other half of us are here, folk. Some of us are in Honolulu. 40,000 strong in Honolulu. Okay? Because yes, we know you were good at cutting cane, but we don't want you to cut cane in Puerto Rico because the sugar beet farmers in the south of the United States are very angry that their prices can't beat your prices, but we'll let you cut cane in Honolulu. I can go through the history. I know it very well. You know it very well. The politics that affected us, the educational decisions that said English-only schools that affected us. We're going to talk about all of these in panels. The health decisions that affect us, the mental health decisions that affect us. All those decisions were made by other people, and we were victims of somebody else's decision-making. And what we have to do in 1991 is say, bastante. It's over, folk. You ain't gonna do it anymore. We are gonna take charge of our own destiny. Now, how do we do that? We do it two ways. We do it the selfish way, and we do it the selfless way. Our tendency is to spend a lot of time doing it the selfless way and putting down the folk who do it the selfish way. Wrong. We got a real problem with that. The problem with that is that we become human services oriented, government oriented, and therefore human services and government dependent. And we put down those in our community who want to rip us off. Baby, I'd rather be ripped off by a Puerto Rican than anybody else. Because I know that dollar stayed in my community. And we don't do that very well. We don't do that very well. And we got to make some sense of that. Our dollar goes around our community 2 times, and then it's gone. We got to start talking about our dollar staying in our community. And we've got a real developmental problem that we're going to have to handle. And the real developmental problem is us in this audience. We are balancing between the older migration, los jibaros, who came here in the 50s and the 60s for economic reasons because they were pushed out, whatever. You know, I love Virginia Sanchez Coro. She writes wonderful stuff. I dispute a lot of her. I've known Virginia since Brooklyn. I don't care how we got here, we're here. But we have a real tender balance between los jibaros who came and their children, the ones who our parents didn't want in Puerto Rico, kicked them out.
We got a real tender balance between them, and then basically there's 30% of the folk in Puerto Rico who get to adulthood every year who can't make it in Puerto Rico. All right? 20% of those are poor people, 10% of those aren't. The 10% of those aren't poor people happen to be because we have the largest age group of any state in the United States, if you made us equivalent to a state of Washington, D.C., of children in college age in college in Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans seek higher education in Puerto Rico more than any other population in the United States. Therefore, we've got too many educated Puerto Ricans. And we ain't got no jobs for them. There are no jobs for an educated Puerto Rican in the island. That's why a lot of you came here. You couldn't compete because your father wasn't in the right party. He was a Commonwealth all the time, and then the statehood party won it. Boom! You had to split. You know? And that affected a lot of you. Your parents thought they were going to have it for the rest of their lives. It didn't work. Life is very fragile. And so then you come. And then there's a pecking order of how they treat us here. You see? There's an order. The most attractive Puerto Rican, Latino, is the one that fits the traditional image. Docile, fun-loving, speak with a little accent. Ay, que lindo. You know? And willing to keep the head about that position. That's the most attractive one of us. That doesn't fit well in the male model of the Puerto Rican. We tend not to like to do that. Porque somos machos. Y nadie me va a decir que ese, yeah. You know? It don't work. I don't want to be sexist, but it does fit in other models.
You know? And I didn't make it that way. I noticed when I was a little kid that in my neighborhood, the guys would fight over the game and kick butt. Hey, he was safe that third base. We punch it out until the other guy would say, yeah, you were safe. I noticed when I turned left and watched my sisters play, that if they got into an argument about a game, one of them would say, okay, let's change the game and do something else. I was raised by the same mother. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how the behavior thing happened. It might be genetic. It might be learned. I don't know. I'm not going to argue with you about it. I've written papers on it, but I won't argue with you about it here. But if you haven't noticed that there's a difference beyond the physical, there is a difference between the sexes. I've always determined that females have better developed brains. Yeah. No, really true. How many women in this room have been, it's the male tends to be more oppressive, more definite, more able to take the challenge, don't know what he's doing, but will be willing to do it, And the female sits there and says, let me be analytical about this,
I think our brains are basically different, okay? We have to do more post-mortem operations on the cranium and, But we are not the attractive representatives that the system tends to want, and that puts us, even in the educated model, in harm's way. Then there's the fact that there's only room for so many of us. Everybody wants their one Latino, you know? Oh, she's so cute, she works in hours, and she's dependable. She comes in every day on time, and she works so hard, and she's good. And they eat pasteles. And that's the way we've got to be treated. And it's really frustrating, and it's getting more frustrating now because you've got this clash between the acceptable model. You know, I don't know about Springfield and Northampton, but you know, Boston, downtown Boston is an English-speaking city in the daytime. You know that. It is a Spanish-speaking city at night. You go in those office buildings, and there's only Spanish spoken at night because that's when we come. We come to clean up. And you hear the guy, oye, no lo hace ese muchacho, mira, los muchachos de Guatemala no saben nada, mira, por ahí, you know? And now, because the Puerto Ricans are the bosses now, you know, they're the managers. And we know how to polish the floor better. So we take over at night. But within that mixture, there is a growing middle class. Look, all your data you look at, okay? You look at 44% of the families live in poverty. You also got to understand that means that, you know, 56% of the families don't live in poverty. And on the positive side, those people have kids too. And those folks happen to be professionals. And those professionals are facing what's above me right now. And you all know what I'm talking about. Latino professionals are facing this, the glass ceiling. You reach up and you think you can get there, but you can't get there. You're not supposed to get there.
One of each is allowable, maybe. We got one state rep, what do you want? We got two superintendents of schools, my God. You know? We had two commissioners in government. Common's not there now. I'm still there. You know? I mean, after all, there is a glass ceiling that the middle class population is facing. And the trouble with that is that the poverty population that we tend to deal with is going to stick around. The service population is not. You can't stay. You can't stay. The next job is not here. It's in Illinois. It's in Indiana. It's in Colorado. It's in New Jersey. You can't stay here. I've been here 30 years. And because I've been here 30 years, folk think I do something. All I do is stay. You see? And because I stay, folks then say, oh yeah, I heard of him, because I've been here. Okay? There are a lot of folk that should have stayed, that we've got to help stay. So let's get down about what we've got to do, because that's one part of it. We have to stay. We've got to try to stay. Let me tell you what I'm doing. And I'm going to ask you to contribute to this, and some of you have. I've talked to some people in this audience about this. I'm putting together a thing called the Hispanic Leadership Conference, the Massachusetts Hispanic Leadership Conference. Not because it's a great idea that I invented. My sister-in-law invented the idea for Colorado after she decided to leave politics. My sister-in-law is Polly Baca, who was a former senator from Colorado and was the vice chair of the National Democratic Party. And she formulated the Colorado Institute of Leadership and Education. And she got a grant. And with that grant, an $808,000 three-year grant to put together a leadership conference. Now, fortunate for me, I helped her write it, and we put in a replication clause. She has to replicate that somewhere else, and she wants to replicate it in Massachusetts. And the good part of what's happening with the grant is that we're finding out that you can open doors for Hispanic leaders in the field of education, in the field of medicine, in the field of mental health, in the field of business, the field of arts, by channeling their energy directly, by having a mentor program, by having a get-together with these folk. 30 a year is what she does. Putting them together for 10 days and sending them out in an outward bound program so they can bond as that year's class that can then help each other out by having people associate, by having them target specific programs in their community that are going to benefit the Latino community and help them have it. In effect, what you do is you develop a statewide mindset that says, I am committed to this program for our community. You involve the entirety of the leadership in the Hispanic community and you say, we're going to help you do this. We're going to help you do this. And pretty soon what happens is you have a statewide agenda formed around people's selfishness and selflessness. And you can help them develop that program. Now we've got to start doing this in Massachusetts because you see, I've gone to too many conferences and too many new beginnings and too many new associations. I welcome them all because the energy is necessary. Your energy is priceless, but we've got to focus it collectively around each other's selfishness. If somebody wants to start a business in your community, the community ought to be able to say, yeah, you keep the prices relatively competitive and I'll buy it from you. If that barber wants to open a barber shop, you ought to be willing to say, I'll get my hair cut there or dressed there. If somebody wants to develop housing, you ought to say, I'll fight for the Section 8 subsidy so that you can have the base money you need to make it marketable, and then we'll make the mixed use happen. If somebody wants to start a neighborhood clinic for well-being for our children and for our pregnant teenagers who are disproportionate, then you ought to be able to say, I'm going to help you do the legal work to get that structure done, find the building, get the funding. We've got to pull together this way. Because everything we're going to talk about in the workshops this afternoon are going to feed in to how we do it. The best thing we've got going for us, folk, is our numbers. There's 5 sources of power in this country. And there's 5 sources of power in most democracies. And we don't have access to 4 of them. So we got to depend on one of them. Those 5 sources are the pluralists, you, our vote. That's one source of power, and it's the one we have access to. Nobody can stop that one. The other access we need for power is knowledge power, academias. We don't have that because you won't stay here. We got to keep those folks here so that can develop. We have our doctors, and we're going to get, what, 4,000 more this year, I think? 4,000 more doctorates in the Latino community with 10 million people, 12 million people. We'll get 4,000 doctorates. That's a shame. Okay? But we have them. But we got to keep them here. Because knowledge power is important. You notice whenever, a Latino issue is dealt with on Nightline, have you seen the Latino come up and talk about it? No. Somebody from Harvard's Kennedy School in England. Yes, I know that country very well. I know exactly what's happening here. Where's the Latino? We've got to do that one, but we don't have knowledge power. We don't have money power. If we had money power, we wouldn't be meeting today. So we can't buy it. Third source of power. We don't own our press. We're doing pretty good. But we don't own our press. We have a possibility of expanding our effectiveness through the press because we do have a monopoly on the fact that our folks speak another language. But we don't support our own press. And we've got to support our own press. And we've got to build our own press, which means we've got to advertise in that press. And we've got to get that press advertisement, and we've got to demand those folk who we buy from to advertise in our press. Look, folks, 52% of the people who buy theater tickets in America for movies are people of color, including us. You don't see many movie advertisements in our paper. Yet we're the ones that buy the tickets. Just like that. You go to that theater and say, you better advertise in my paper. I don't come anymore. They'll advertise. Okay? But we don't own the press, and we belong to a world church. You see, we belong to a world church that's becoming more and more dependent on us because we got the numbers. Thank God for children. We got the numbers, and they're becoming more dependent on us. You see? But we still don't own that church. Do you realize that the Cardinal in Massachusetts has a subcommittee that meets with him regularly of blacks? He doesn't have one of Latinos. Cardinal Law. That's fairly interesting because we're the major part of the growth of the church.
But it's interesting because we've been so much a part of that church for so long, we just go along. We just go along. And we've got to start opening the doors in those other 4 areas. The only place we got to knock, we can go in without knocking right now, is in the door of political power. Because we got numbers. The trouble is we focus our numbers in the wrong places, and we don't organize well enough around where our numbers are. We should have a mayor of Chelsea right now. Right now. We should have a mayor in Lawrence right now. Right now. And we can have councilors here in Springfield. And we should have people participating in Northampton. We're making some successes in some places, but we've got to do better. You see, the trouble is we aim big. We want to be mayors of Boston and governors. And we got to remember that select men and select women is pretty good. That county commissioner is pretty good. That probate is pretty good. There's a lot of places we can go. And we've got to organize around that concept. I'll be talking more about that in our workshop this afternoon of how we do the politics. But we've got to help each other. Now, I focused in on Puerto Ricans. I'm Puerto Rican. But as I said, I'm married to a Chicana. This is ditto for the rest of the world. Understand, we have time working against us. We produce as many Latinos a day as we lose. All right? Latinos don't marry Latinos, folk. Well, we do, but only 60% of us. 38% of us don't marry other Latinos. So we lose Latinos as we produce Latinos. There's another way of losing your identity. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse ride above us because we are annexed people. We lost the war. We suffer a different type of famine. We suffer a famine of the spirit, which leads to a hunger of identity. And our death is going to be cultural genocide. We've got to decide what's important in our culture to pass on. Last summer in the Hispanic Jewish dialogue, we pulled together a very unique group of middle-class Latino kids and middle-class Jewish kids that had one thing in common. Their parents were Jewish, and their parents were Hispanic. They were not. We put 15 kids of each group with this identity, and we got them together to talk about how that happened. How did it come to the point where your parents were Jewish, and your parents were Hispanic, and you were not? What happened? And these were kids who had religious parents who were practicing Jews, kids that had 2 Spanish-speaking parents, etc. The whole mix. They were not. What happened? To the T, every one of them said, my parents really don't want me to be. My parents don't want me to be. What's happening to us? What's happening to us where we think that's another way out? And some of us think that's a way out. Look, a lot of us can pass, man. You know? We can pass. The way my wife's family passes, it was very interesting. I saw a tape last year. I saw a tape of the family reunion. They get together in Wyoming, about 300 of them. And they get together in Wyoming at a family farm there. There's a big farm that one of the family owns. And they all come. The matriarch of their line is La Señora Gallegos. And La Señora Gallegos sits there proudly. She's 85 too. And the whole family surrounds her. And then they tape it. And they say, well, how do you fit? Well, my grandfather was and my uncle. And it's very interesting to watch that tape. Because you would see the kids who had connection to the Hispanic background say, yeah, my name is Richard Gallegos and we live in San Antonio. And then you would see the kids from the intermarriages say, my name is Richard Gallegos and Gallegos. And it's happening. So we lose as we gain. And we've got to deal with that whole issue of cultural genocide. What do we want to be? How do we do the American thing and maintain the Latino thing? Notice what happened here this morning. Yo no voy a hablar en español, pero alguien va a hablar en español. We have to apologize because we're not going to do the bilingual thing. Why do we do that? Think about it. Why do we do that? We have to set up the arrangement so to make sure that everybody speaks, understands. So we get, simple math would tell you only need maybe, 3 or 4 folk have to have the translation because we're here. But we feel obligated. It's sort of like our persona says we have to be very sensitive to that factor because we measure each other on that, you see? Oye, él no es latino porque él no habla español. And you really feel that when you go back, right? If you go back, tú ves, ay, mira, ay, viene de ahí, ¿no? You've all felt that one, right? Viene de ahí. It's sort of the one-upmanship about being more Latino than the other. Well, folk, the identity is in you. It's in you. That's where it comes from. When in Holland, the Jews were told that you had to wear the Star of David, the king got to the balcony and he put on the Star of David. He was a Jew. And everybody in Holland put on the Star of David. It's in you. You say, I'm a Latino. And you're not going to tell me what that is because it is always changing. But there are pieces of it that are very important to us. And there's things we do very well. Let me talk as I wind down about one thing, our concepts of success and failure. Folk, I don't buy the failure game. I look at the statistics, and the ones that make me cringe are the ones about our health. That's absolute. That affects the body, and it affects the longevity. We've got to do something about that. We've got to do something about our babies, making sure they're born free of illnesses, not drug dependent, that they're not born to as many children that are having them. We've got to do something about that. We've got to do something about our mental health, and we've got to do something about how our mental health gets defined and who makes the decision. We've got to do something about the fact that 1 out of 10 of us are in prison. We've got to do something about those types of things. Those are very important. But let me tell you some other things that always bother me. The education bandwagon, our dropout rate. When I came to Boston, Orlando, remember? When we were in Boston in 1968, we had a 100% dropout rate. 100%. Not one Latino graduated from high school in 1968. We now have a 50% dropout rate. To me, the glass is half full. We're doing real well. Let's get it up there. But if we talk about that dropout rate the way they want us to talk about it, that our schools are failing, of course our schools are failing. And as our schools become more minority, more people of color, blame the victim.
Say that our schools are failing, because the next thing you say, well, who's in the schools that are failing? Oh, them. And then you fall prey to that type of thinking, okay? Our schools have been failing for years. Our school failed the Irish. Our schools failed the Italians. Our schools failed the Greeks. Our schools failed blacks, and they fail us. But they always have been failing the newcomer. That's not new. What's new now is we have grown to such numbers that our children are disproportionate parts of that school and they don't want to pay. So our president now has an educational plan and he ain't putting a penny into it. And the only part of that plan that he's going to do seriously that he really cares about is choice. Which means they don't have to go to school without kids. That's the only part he cares about. Because that's the only part he can affect. He can't do anything about the other parts. Education belongs to the states. We know that. He can do something about the choice thing. Separate and unequal again. That's where they're going. Watch out. It's our fault. Well, it ain't our fault. And our kids don't do that badly. And dropout isn't the end of the world. And I go to schools and say that, and people get really upset. The teachers go, oh, Jesus, I want them to stay in school. No, I don't buy that. I'm not going to make a kid feel like dirt because he dropped out. He's being forced out. And he's supposed to walk away feeling bad? No. I'm not going to contribute to that. He's being forced out. She's being forced out. Do you realize how disproportionate our kids get left back because of attendance? Because of attendance. I mean, check the records. There's a force-out problem in our public schools. It's not a dropout problem. There's a mismatch between who teaches and what gets taught. And what we gotta do is take it over. We gotta take it over. Those are our schools, they're our kids. Take it over. Because the picture from the 60s that sticks with me with the most, and it was a little white girl. It was a little white girl, and I remember it. And I don't know if you remember, she's sitting there and she had a white top on, and her knees were sort of holding it, and she had a tear coming down her eye, a dark-haired girl. And she said, and somebody must have said it to her, but she was responding. She said, I'm not junk. God don't make junk. And our kids are not junk. Our kids are not junk. But we got a lot of work to do. All that said, we got to get up tomorrow morning and figure out how to keep our leadership here, how to advance our leadership, how to help one another, how to pull together. And guys, I've heard for too long the bull crap of our developmental stages. We got to get rid of that stuff. He don't represent the community. She don't represent the community. It's so easy to put down. It don't take any energy. Negative power is the easiestly attained power in the world. Dismembering of government is the easiest thing to do. I mean, William Weld don't need brain cells to do that. You just don't have to show up. That's what he did this week. He just took off. Don't bother me. You know, I'm on furlough. You know? You don't have to be too smart to not have a government. We've got to take back what's ours. We ain't going to win big ones, folks. We've got to have little goals, incremental goals, one step in front of the other. But we have to be a we first, and we're not a we. That's our problem. We got to come together. We got to say, look, I'm sorry. I know how you feel about me. Let's try to figure it out. Because the bonchinche and the underhanded stuff and all that just don't help. We've got too much at risk, our children. Thank you.
Ojalá hayan disfrutado la presentación de hoy de Vecinos, Neighbors, y que usted y sus vecinos nos acompañen la semana entrante. Mientras tanto, déjenos saber su opinión llamando al 568-9433.